We'll read Psalms 3 and 4. Psalm 3 verse 1, O Lord, how my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the one who lifts my head. I was crying to the Lord with my voice, and he answered me from his holy mountain. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustains me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you have smitten all my enemies on the cheek, and you have shattered the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. Psalm 4 verse 1. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have relieved me in my distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O sons of men, how long will my honor become a reproach? How long will you love what is worthless and aim at deception? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly man for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Tremble and do not sin. Meditate in your heart upon your bed and be still. Offer the sacrifices of righteousness and trust in the Lord. Many are saying, who will show us any good? Lift up the light of your countenance upon us, O Lord. You have put gladness in my heart, more than when their gain and new wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me to dwell in safety. So I bring you this morning to Psalm 3. And this is the first time I've ever preached to it, so this will be first go for me. I planned on covering 3 and 4. It's just no way. I got hung up on 3 and I couldn't go any further. So I have a title for verse 4, for Psalm 4, but so here's the thing. I wanted to focus on prayer. But I didn't want prayer to be focused on an abstraction. Sometimes we do that, and it's not a bad thing. When you think about prayer and say, define it, well, what is prayer? It's talking to God and having communication with God. And these are all the component parts of what prayer looks like. And I really just didn't want to go down that road and just deal with abstract, theoretical ideas. And then say, okay, here you go now, go pray. So what I wanted to do was look at prayer, but in action. What does it look like when one of God's people, and this, a man after God's own heart, what does it look like when he prays? So that is what sort of started me on this, and I don't know when I'm going to end talking about prayer from Psalms. I've already got others in my head. I promise, I'm going to get to 1 Corinthians, but I just had to go here because I realized there are people who are just dealing with trouble in their life now. So my prayer is that this will, by God's will, speak to their hearts and lives, as well as to our own. If I could, and I borrowed these words from Psalm 5, this is the title of the message. And really it's 3 and 4 put together, but we're only going to do 3 today. And it is this: give ear to my cry for help, my King and my God. I take these words from Psalm 5, but they sum up Psalms 3 and 4. Psalms 3 and 4, we have a similar situation, and there's sort of this progression that moves. Psalm 3 is a morning prayer for trust in God. Psalm 4 is an evening prayer of trust in God. And then we move to Psalm 5, which also continues on the idea of prayer for protection from the wicked. But this is where I hung for this week. It's just floating around in my head. And there's so much here. Like, I just sit and talk about these words just from Psalm 5, but we're going to get into 3. But here it is. Give ear to my cry for help, my King and my God. Now the first part, desperation. Second part, hope. Hope. But I'll just say this though. Without that second part, there's no hope. It's not merely King and God, or our King and our God. It is my King and my God. That's where the hope comes. It is that relationship with God. I can cry out and I can petition for help, and I have hope because it is my King and my God that I'm speaking to, because I have a relationship with Him. But there's some thoughts as we come to the issue of prayer, just from the words coming from Psalm 5, and again, these pertain to 3 and 4. First thought, we can see the intermingling of lament and confidence. They go hand in hand. Psalm 3, notice with me, okay? Verse 4, I was crying to the Lord with my voice. I'm just screaming out. And notice the second line, and He answered me from His holy mountain. I was crying, present tense. He what? Answered, past tense. He answered me. Notice verse 5 then. I lay down and I slept, and I woke, for the Lord sustains me. There's confidence there, but there's lament. That's the complexity of our life. I mean, you're just listening to the words that we sing, right? Christ on the cross. There was sorrow, right? But then there's also that rejoicing that comes because of what He did. There is the intermingling of the two. So there can be lament, but at the same time, there's confidence here. Keep that in mind when we come to Psalm 3. We can see in the midst of great pressure and pain that there is a time for prayer. No doubt David was feeling this in verses 1 and 2. O Lord, how my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God. Pressure and pain, trouble in our life ought to drive us to God. Ought to. 9/11, there was a sort of a turning back to God in a sense in this nation, right? But unfortunately for some people, they don't see it as a time of prayer or a time to respond and see that God is trying to communicate to them and call them to Himself. So a friend of mine, Steve, he was my best friend growing up. He and I, we did everything together, inseparable. So I was going off to Master's College, and I decided one last hurrah. We were going to take a last road trip together, and we were going to make it good. So I picked him up in San Clemente. I lived in Huntington Beach. I picked him up in San Clemente. We took our surfboards. We surfed the coast all the way up to San Francisco under the Golden Gate Bridge, and then surfed all the way back down the coast again. So I dropped him off at home in San Clemente. I drove back to Huntington Beach. I got my Hobie Cat sailboat, hooked it up to my car, and I took off and I drove back to his house. I picked him up and went down to San Diego to Mission Bay to sail on the ocean for a few days. So we had a friend of ours who came a couple days left, and he wanted to come and hang out with us. So he comes down, and it was in the evening time around 7 o'clock. And we had run out of groceries, so we said, we need some food for breakfast. We'll drive to 7-Eleven, get a few things, and then come back to the campground. So we're driving, old Ford Falcon, no seatbelts. So my friend Fuzz is in the front seat driving, and then Steve is in the passenger seat in the front, and I'm in the back, and I'm trying to get my shoes on. And we're heading to 7-Eleven, and we're going through an intersection when all of a sudden, bam, we got T-boned by a drunk driver in a pickup truck. He didn't put the brakes on. He just hit us and drove us all the way across the road onto an island. So, fortunately, no seatbelts. My foot, because I had my shoes, my foot got caught under the seat and kept me from going flying through the window, but nonetheless, I got banged up really well. I came back to consciousness, and I climbed out of the car, and I saw Steve, so I pulled him out of the front. He had gone into the windshield. So I pulled him out, took him aside the road. I took my shirt off, wrapped it around his head. I went back to the car, and I got my friend Fuzz, pulled him out, took him over, put him aside. I went over to the truck to see if I could do anything for the driver, and there's just images you wish you could remove from your mind. But there's nothing I could do. So I went back to my friends. The police come, ambulances come. They take everyone away, and I'm left standing in the middle of this intersection with nothing. So I'm there in a pair of jeans, no shoes, no shirt. I run back to the campground. I get my car, find the hospital where Steve is. They had a plastic surgeon there, and they stitched him up, and they released him. And they said, you need to keep him every hour, wake him up so make sure he doesn't go unconscious and go into a coma, make sure he's okay, and give him this medication, and they released him. So I take him back to the campground, and so every hour through the night, I wake him up and make sure he's okay and give him his medication. The next morning, I had to pack everything up, load up the boat, and we're heading out. And all the while, Steve had not said anything, had talked. We're driving in the car home. And then all of a sudden, he says to me, God keeps throwing things at me, but he won't break me. And I said to him, I said, Steve, I said, do you really want him to take your life and to be in the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth before you finally get it and answer him? Some people don't realize that the time of trouble, God is speaking to them. And they don't see it as a time of response or a time of prayer. Time of pressure and pain is a time to go to God. It is a time to go to God. But not only that, it is a time for praise and peace. And we'll see this in Psalm 3. Another thought. We can see movement from anxiety to assurance. In Psalm 4, David cries out, answer me when I call, O Lord of my righteousness, O God of my righteousness. Then notice how he ends this in verse 8. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me to dwell safely. We can find quietness in the midst of trouble, and we absolutely can, but it's only because he is our King and our God. So this is the interaction that comes as we come to Psalm 3. And I bring you here, but I have to these thoughts that come back. So there has been a thread of thought for me through all these Psalms as we've looked at them. Pick up some thoughts. We look back in Psalm 93. The Lord reigns. He is robed in majesty. Psalm 96:10, say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is established. It cannot be moved. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let the many coastlands be glad. The Lord reigns. The nations tremble. He sits enthroned above the cherubim, the winged angels. The earth shakes. Your throne has been secure from ancient times. He sits enthroned above the winged angels, and the earth shakes. Psalm 93:4, above the sound of the surging water and the mighty waves of the sea, the Lord sits enthroned quietly in his majesty. This is it. We talked about this before, but this is a place for our faith to rest. And to just say, for those who are going through trials and trouble and difficulty and pressure and pain, this is the thought. Our God reigns. He sits upon the throne and he's never been removed. I mean, this is the beautiful thing. There's so many things that when we're in times of trouble and trial and pain and pressure, there's so many places where we put our trust. We set our trust here. We set our trust there. We set it here. We set it there. But here's the great truth. Don't just set it there where he reigns enthroned over everything. Let it rest. And then don't ever move it away from there. Whatever we face in life, if our faith just rests in the fact that God is enthroned, we can walk through anything. And this is what brings David back again as he reflects on the fact of who God is and what he has done. And essentially in his prayer, this is what gives him confidence. So not only do we find in God's sovereignty the fact that he sits there and I love effortless sovereignty over all things. It is not only a place for faith to rest, it is a place for prayer. I pray because God is sovereign. I pray because he's omniscient. I pray because, right, he is who he is. And he knows more than what I know. And he knows things I don't know. So go with me to Psalm 3, morning prayer of trust in God. The psalm is first in many ways. It is the first psalm of Davidic psalms. It is the first psalm of lament. And it is in one sense really the first psalm of prayer that comes in this, but it is the first psalm with the music notation Selah. And it's interesting because when we begin this way in the Psalter, the first of the Davidic Psalms, it's not a nationalistic thing. It's not an our or we, it's a I, me, right? It's a personal relationship that David has with God, and he draws on that. The superscription of this psalm identifies it was written by David le David. It is in the book, the first book of the Psalter, from Psalms 1 through 41. 37 of the 41 Psalms are all ascribed to David, except for Psalm 2, 10, and 33. So this book is really a Davidic psalm book, if you will, although there are other psalms that he has written. This psalm is clear focal point, and this is it, that prayer brings confidence to face life. It just does. It does. This isn't prayer in theoretical realm. This isn't prayer in abstraction. This is just prayer in life. It brings confidence when we face life. You look at the transition that David makes from verse 4 to verse 5. I was crying to the Lord with my voice, and He answered me from this holy mountain. And what did I do? I laid down and I slept, and I woke, for the Lord sustains me. It's a great thing when we understand who we're talking to, and that's really where the confidence arises. He reflects on that in verse 3. So the movement of the psalm actually goes like this. It starts and it moves towards verses 4 through 6. And it goes like this. The issue of need, verses 1 and 2, no deliverance, right? This is the taunt. There is no deliverance for him in God, right? God can't do anything for you. He's not going to deliver you. How many times do we hear that, well, the world has what you ail for and what you cry out for, right? What can your God do for you? Affirmation, verse 3. Divine protection, notice. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the one who does what? Lifts my head. Then comes the prayer in 4 through 6, which brings confidence. And then the appeal, verse 7, divine deliverance. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you have smitten all my enemies on the cheek, and you have shattered the teeth of the wicked. And then the solution. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. It's the solution. And I just love this because you just let it rest there. It ends there, right? I'm going through this time of trouble. Just leave it with the Lord. Just set it there. He is the one who delivers. He is the deliverer. He's the only one who can. And this deliverance isn't just the temporal deliverance. This is also eternal deliverance. This is the full package. It is the deliverance in the Hebrew. So He may not take you out of that temporary trial and trouble you're going through, but eventually it's going to come in that final deliverance. Paul knew this in Philippians. He says, I know that this will turn out for my deliverance. He's not talking about release from prison there. He is talking about His ultimate salvation. This is all a part and parcel of what God is doing in my life. And finally, that final deliverance is going to come for me. I know that it will. And this is all a part of that. Whatever trials and trouble we're going through, whatever pain we are experiencing, whatever pressure we are under, it is all a part of the great deliverance that is going to come. And it will come. It will come. So my solution is just leave it there. Leave it with the Lord. Because there's nothing we can do to change it. So the psalm has a historical background. 2 Samuel 15:13 through 17:24. I'm going to do this because I don't know about you, but I'm really dying here. Why is the heat on? All right. I won't delete this from the video. So the Jewish tradition has the background of this psalm. And you notice in your English text, for some of them they have it, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. So that's the background to this, the historical background. And we can sit and talk about the whole historical background of it and lose sight of what is here. We get lost in that, but that is the context, and we keep that in mind, and we will as we go through this. But this is where Absalom's attempt at a coup, right? You're going to drive, and David is driven out of the kingdom. So this is awesome, the things that David contemplates. So David had fled from the palace. He's surrounded by his enemies, his innumerable adversaries who were convinced he had no hope. And no doubt the initial flight from Absalom covered 2 nights. And the first, which we could understand that David was found despondent, verses 1 and 2. This is where I'm at. My adversaries have increased. They're rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul. Right? The despondency. So here's what's awesome. The antidote to despondency. You ever felt like that? You ever felt despondent? Everything just keeps piling up. It just gets worse and worse and worse, and I don't know how I'm going to come out from under this. I mean, talk about a man from high to low. He's up in the palace. He's the king over the United Nation, right? And what happens? He's now fleeing. Hood overhead, downcast, he's leaving the city. He's got nowhere to go. He's been there before, right? Remember when Saul was chasing him? He's hiding in caves. He's all over the place. He's got no place of rest. He knows what it means to be high up and down low. So here in the midst of this, man, there is despondency that David is feeling. And the way for the antidote for this is simply this: assertion of divine truth and then seek divine aid. Reflect on who God is and then talk to Him. Talk to Him. So I have a friend, and man, he's got skills. He really does. He can, seriously, you stick him in any situation, he could lose a job, he'll create a job. He'll create a business, he'll create a company. It's just the way he is. Stick him in the middle of nowhere with nothing, and before you know it, he has stuff. It's just how he does. But here's the problem. It's all about him. And it's all about what he can do and how he delivers himself. And he's never really come around to see that in the midst of that time, what you should be doing is just looking to the Lord, reflecting on who He is. And so here we have a call on God out of what I know of God. Every day is a theology test. It is. Every day is. All the things that we face. Going to test what we know about God. David's going to dwell on that in verse 3. That's really what brings his confidence. So the antidote: assert divine truth, seek divine aid, and then the consequence of the antidote is this: a good night's sleep and a fresh confidence for a new day. Who doesn't want that? And how many times have we troubled over the things that we're going through and we're thinking, how can I get out of this? And my friend would be like, I've got 5, 10, 15 plans of how to get myself out of this. Not once does he ever consider God in it. That's the problem. That's the problem. So you lay abed at night trying to figure out all your ways out of this, when God is just saying, leave it with me, I'm the solution, put it there, and then go to sleep. And then wake up the next day ready to go at it again. This isn't prayer and abstraction. This is a man in real life, real time, real trouble, real difficulty, real despondency. And he's saying, here is my answer to that. This is what I did. So the situation, verses 1 through 2, and this is interesting, and I give you this, the Greek particle, and we have it translated in as how. And this is ma, and it's an exclamation, adverbial exclamation if you really have to know. But the particle controls all 3 lines that follow, and not all translations pick this up. Ours doesn't do it either in the NASB, if you have it with me. But it reaches a climax. It's also indicated there's a shift from the perfect, notice, have increased, to the participle, rising, saying, the ing words. Okay? So notice how this builds. How adversaries have increased. How many rising against me. How many are saying, and then here's the kick in the gut, God will not deliver you. He can't. There's no deliverance in God for you. You see, there's no hope then, right? They're robbing David of any kind of hope at all that you could ever be delivered out of this situation. We've driven you out of your kingdom. You're gone. You're out of here. And there is no hope for you. None. You ever felt like that? It's just no hope. Everything in the world is telling you there is no hope for you. I mean, this is the killing blow, if you will, for David. This is what leads him then to the verses that follow. But notice, we have an attitude that has become action, and it then becomes public opinion. Not even God can help you now. Over and over this builds. Not only that, but it's personal. So we'll look at this deliverance, and I'll come back to this in a moment, but I want you to see this. Personal pronoun runs all the way through here. My foes upon me of my soul. So I reflected on this. This is something that David had to go through. No one else could deliver him from it. Listen to me, there are going to be troubles in your life. There's going to be pain in your life. There's going to be pressure in your life, and no one else can go through it for you. No one can. It's yours and yours alone. Not to say that people cannot come alongside and comfort you and be there for you, but listen to me, you still have to walk it on your own. You think about Christ when He calls the disciples, you want to come after me, you must take up your own cross, right? Not our cross, your own one. And each of us has our own cross to bear. We have certain burdens and troubles in our life that only we are going to walk through. You can have two people who have cancer. They're totally different people, can be a totally different cancer, or even the same, but they're totally different. They have two different personalities, two different limitations and things that they can handle and things that they can go through, things that they have to learn about God through the process. And no one can do that for them. So notice 2 Samuel with me. Notice chapter 16, 2 Samuel. So this is just crazy. First time I read it years ago, I was like, man, are you kidding me? So here it is, chapter 16, verse 5. When David, king, came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And he came out cursing continually as he came. Verse 6, he threw stones at David and at all his servants of the king David and all the people and all the mighty men that were at his right and at his left. Thus Shimei said, when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed, you worthless one. So verse 9, then Abishai, right, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Let me rip his head off. Just come on, let me go rip his head off. Notice what David says. But the king, verse 10, said, what do I have to do with sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, and if the Lord has told him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? Then David, verse 11, said to Abishai, look at the end of the verse, let him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has told him. And perhaps, verse 12, the Lord will look on my affliction and return good to me instead of his cursing this day. David says, look, if this is what God wants, leave him be. It's mine to go through it. How do you feel like that? I mean, time of trouble, right? And you're in great despondency. No one else can go through it but you alone. You have to walk through this. This was David's thing. He had to go through this. And we want to remove people from it. We want to say, man, if I could do this for you, I would. I don't know how many times my dad has said that over my lifetime, but it gets, Dad, it's mine to do. It's mine to do. So notice the supplication, verses 3 through 4. First is the affirmation of who God is, verse 3. And it is emphatic. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the one who lifts my head. This is emphatic. In other words, the focus is emphatically on God. Let's think about this for a moment. This is how David responds to this situation, which is adverse. It's piling up on him personally. He's got to go through this, and it's God he turns to. this is the breakthrough, right? Is grasping afresh who God is. It's what these moments in life are for. And if you miss that, you miss the beauty of the moment. When you think about David's response, in the midst of allegation, he responds with theological affirmation. In other words, theology is what is going to carry him through this. It's what shapes his outlook. It's what shapes his attitude. It is what he knows of God. It's what gives him confidence in prayer. So I was thinking, when I had left Russia, I had sent Les and the kids back, and I was there 5 weeks. They were in the States without me. And God had opened up a door, at least this is how I saw. There was a piece of property here. There's no house. There was nothing around here, open field, lots, and a picture of a lot. My dad sent me and says, here's this ground. Maybe God wants you to do something with it. That's what made us move here. So I left ministry there, and I was going to transition out of there, but leaving church I was pastoring, teaching in the seminary, doing all that. I'm going to walk away from that, sure stuff, to a piece of ground. I had no idea it was going to come. And I sent Les and the kids ahead, and we were going to make the transition. So I'm selling everything. So I'm left there, and basically all I had was a couch. That's all I had. And a kitchen sink. That's it. Everything else was gone. So here I'm 5 weeks without my wife and kids, and she was pregnant with Tristan, and we had to get her on a plane early because after that you can't fly. So I'm flying from Novosibirsk to Moscow, 4-hour flight, and it was just, I wouldn't go on the flight. It was just a bad flight. And hairy Russian woman with vodka. So just, we get to Moscow, and I was flying with a friend of mine. His dad had just passed away. And he didn't know if his dad was a believer or not. So he and I stayed in a room together in Moscow, and it was just a time of just dwelling on God, right? And the unassurance that he had, but yet the assurance of who God was. And this is what we did for we just reveled in God and the Word of God. Little did I know that would be the last time I would see him. So he takes off to go bury his father, and I get on the plane to fly back to LA, and I can't wait to get home. Tristan's coming. I gotta get home. I haven't seen my wife in 5 weeks. I gotta see my kids. And I get off the plane, and I feel it moving in my body. And all of a sudden, all the blood just drains from my head. And there were these potted plant things as you're coming off the plane, and I fell to the wall. And I started sliding down the wall, and I'm thinking, this is it. I'm going home. I don't know how I came to. I don't even know how I got through customs. The thing I remember only is there was this guy, apparently baggage handler, and I said to him, I need help. I'm going to pass out again. So he lays me on this bench, and he called the paramedics. Never saw him again after that. So I'm laying there, and the paramedics come, and this guy, he's like, we got to take the hospital. I said, look, my wife is here to pick me. I haven't seen her in 5 weeks. I'm going home. That's all I need. Just send me home. I'll be fine. He says, no, you need to listen to me. You need to go to the hospital. I said, no, I'm going home. Get my wife. I'm out of here. And he said, no. And he said, listen to me, sir. He goes, I am going to strongly advise you. You can do what you want, but I'm going to strongly advise you. I must take you to the hospital now. So one of the paramedics, well, this is going on, goes and I guess gets my wife. She comes down. They take me to the hospital. It's a good thing you're here. You should have died. So I'm now hospitalized, and all of this trip and everything's going on. My wife goes into labor, and I can't be there. And I'm fighting with the nurses. I'm like, I gotta get out of here. You don't understand. Look, I raised heck. I'm getting out of here. I'm walking out of this place. They said, you can't go. My heart rate was so low, they had injected some stuff into me. It was supposed to accelerate it. Gave me 2 cups of black coffee, and it still wasn't up high enough. They said, if we can't get it up, we're going to put a pacemaker in you. I said, I can't stay here for that. I got to go. So finally, after all of this and everything, they finally released me. I get there. Tristan's already been born. I hold him for a couple seconds. I hand him. I says, someone take him, and I just collapsed in the chair. So during that 5 weeks, I know it was just a horrible time for my wife. So all of this stuff goes on. And you're just like, I have no control over anything that is happening. But here is what gets you all the way through that. It's who God is. It is who He is. And it's drawing from that fact. And that is the certainty. It isn't anything in David like, look what I could do and I could get myself through this. It's just simply, this is my God. This is who He is. I give it to Him. I go to bed. And I wake up the next day and get moving again. Every day is a theology test. David says, He's my shield. This is known throughout the Psalter. We see it over and over again, depicting God's protection. God is the true source of His protection, in spite of their taunts. And I love this statement in verse 3. Notice, shielded all around. Total protection. Did he still go through difficulty? Yes, but listen to me. They could not hurt him any further than God allowed them to hurt him. It didn't take him out of that. He still had to walk through that, Shimei and everything, casting rocks, cursing him, telling him, I want to kill you. You shouldn't be here. But notice me. He says then in verse 6, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves, notice, against me round about. I am surrounded by antagonists, and it doesn't matter how many, thousands upon thousands, it doesn't matter. He has enshrouded me with His protection. You can't touch this. You can't touch this. It's amazing, isn't it? It's your God. David says, not only that, He's my glory. It's my glory. David was aware of the fact that God's glory was manifested in his life. But here's the thing. They could strip him of everything he had. Castle, wealth, all that position. They could not take God from him. Strip all of this away. Take the house, the cars, the land. You can take everything. I don't care. If you cannot take God from me, then the rest of it does not matter. It doesn't matter. All you can say is, please God, don't deprive me of yourself. Because I can't bear it. Yes? And ultimately, He is the one who lifts my head. David walks out of there downcast, hooded, and undercover. And God is the one who's going to raise up His head. The affirmation of what God has done, verse 4. And it just leaves this for you to dwell on. But notice the transition from the verb forms. I was crying to the Lord with my voice. This was a painful time. Listen to me. You stabbed in the back, but this wasn't a total stranger. This was his own boy. Stabbed him in the back, drove him out of his kingdom. Right? I mean, talk about ultimate betrayal. That's got to hurt. That's got to hurt. But there's an affirmation as he prays this. He answered. I was crying, meaning that he was doing it, and at the same time, he was full aware that God had answered his prayer already. That's assurance. That is a quiet confidence that David has in the midst of this. The security, verses 5 and 6. He laid down and he slept in the midst of battle. I love this because here it is. So I'm not going to break down all the components of the Hebrew for you, but I'll just do verse 5 like this. If you have an NASB, they have it in a marginal note. This is a subjective, intensive form that is here in verse 5. And if I could put it this way, and thus, verse 5, and thus as for me, I then lay down and slept, and I awoke, for the Lord sustains me. This is what I did, right? In the most difficult time of my life, this is what I did. I gave it to God, and then He gave me rest. He awoke sustained, and his fear was conquered. His fear was conquered. Sometimes, notice verse 4, Psalm 4, verse 4, tremble and do not sin. Listen to me, fear is going to come, trembling is going to come in life. That's going to happen. But here, it's how we respond to the situations. But notice this, literally the second line of verse 4 of Psalm 4 is this: speak in your heart upon your bed and do what? Be still. Be still. Just take it to God. He's the solution. And just leave it there. And I know some have different handling of Psalm 4 another time. The salvation, verses 7 and 8. God arises, and David is saved. In verse 2, the psalmist, the enemies are rising up against him, so he built off the same term, kamim, and they're literally rising up upon him. Now he's going to ask for God to do the same thing. He's going to build off the same room, kumah. He's going to ask God to rise up in his defense. This is the battle cry of Moses in Numbers chapter 10, verse 35. This is awesome, because this great cry that came from Moses, David is expressing his confidence in the fact that even in his apparent defeat, God was still guiding. He was still under divine guidance. Listen, no matter how difficult things look, how trying they are, how troubling they are, God's still guiding. Remember, He sits on the throne. He's never left. And He sees things we can't see. And sometimes we look at our trouble and trial and we think it's just about us. It's not just about us. It's for other people. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. He has given us this comfort in our affliction so that we can what? Comfort others who are in affliction. It's not just about us. God sees our life so much better than we do. And He sees what's going to come of it. He knows what He's going to do with it all. We can't see all of that. We just need to trust Him in that. It's like if we could look at our life, if we took a string, took it from this wall, that back wall, a long white string, and said, this is eternity, right? And then we took a red pin and we just put a dot right on that string. That is the span of your life. From the time you were born to the time you died, that's the span of your life in length of eternity, right? Which is never ending. Now, if you look at the trouble that you were in, it's just a fraction of that little red dot on that line. But see, when we're in the trouble, that's all we see. God sees all of this around. He sees lives around you that He's working in that need to see and watch you go through this and the trial and the trouble and see how you handle it and see how you respond and who God is. God's doing so much more than we ever imagined in this little moment. Just know that He is still guiding. He's on the throne. He's working out His plan. The enemy is smitten on the jaw and his teeth are shattered. People run away from this. But this is what David says, but I love this, right? Your foe, he's toothless. He's toothless. Just think about this, right? You ever experienced someone who's so angry with you? I'm going to just get you. Man, they bare their fangs, they're like going to rip you apart, right? Abishai, tear his head off, right? Literally, what do you want to do? I'm going to rip his head off. You see the foe like that. This is amazing. God defangs him. God defangs him. Gone. He has a way of doing that, doesn't He? Of defanging the troublemakers in life and the troubling situations that we face. So often we look at them and there's so much bite in it. But listen to me, God can defang whatever it is you're dealing with. He can take the bite out of it. Christ has already done it. Oh death, where is what? Where is your sting? You got nothing to fear from death anymore as a believer. Right? We can face it rejoicing, because He is my King and my God. Salvation and blessing, they belong to God, and they will come to His people. I leave you with a solution. The salvation, the deliverance, this is the whole package, whether temporally or eternally. The deliverance belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. Let's pray. Father, we thank You. We thank You for who You are. That You sit upon the throne and You have enthroned Yourself. We haven't done it. Man hasn't done it. This world hasn't done it. From the very beginning, by eternal right, you sit upon that throne. And no matter what happens in this world, hurricanes, tornadoes, famines, no matter how much the seas roar and pound up against us, Father, no matter how much trouble we go through, no matter how much pain we may feel, no matter how much the pressure, we rest in the fact that you sit on the throne. And may we all find our rest there and only there. My God and my King. And all God's people said, amen.